September 2002, as we moved to March 2003, it became more and more clear that, in fact, we would have to probably end up going to war and probably would enter into Iraq.
I remember, I believe it was late summer, that we understood that we would have to deploy in order to take the mission to go to Iraq. It was about probably August, and there was a gate training strategy that we had to develop in order to have the soldiers train and for our platoons and our companies in order to be confident. My brigade combat team deployed with the 101st, the rest of our division, in February of 2003. We went to Kuwait and occupied several assembly areas, camps, if you will, and my brigade was in Camp Pennsylvania.
I have a military background. I was in the Marines myself when I was a young man, so I understand certain things about being with the military. So when the Pentagon first announced that it was thinking about having bringing journalists with them, having an embedded journalism program, my editor came to me, or actually the foreign editor for the Chronicle approached me and asked me would I be interested in being part of it.
I was writing a novel at the time, but I gradually felt that this work of the imagination was turning into a series of daily articles on the approaching war, on my friends leaving Baghdad for their hometowns, and on the mindset of the youth in face of the new world awaiting them. The future was blurred. That's what frightened people most. But within that fear, there was a hope for change. People wanted this change, whatever the cost, even foreign occupation.
We were audiovisual graduates. We were posted to radio and TV station. My department numbered 2 young women, 1 older lady and 2 men. None of us felt like reporters.
In Iraq, the situation was this. The people were hungry, and the soldiers' pay was very low. They wanted everything back to normal, so that they could start living like people in the Gulf states. They believed that after Iraq was invaded, they'd live like there, in safety and in wealth, wanting for nothing.
Medium regular coat. Large regular coat. Medium regular coat.
I was renting a house, me, an officer, a colonel in the army. Was my monthly pay enough to feed the family? After 2 weeks, it had all gone. After 10 days, all gone. How do you make it to the end of the month? I'm talking about my own situation during a time when all we ate was bread and yogurt. A bit of cheese and a yogurt, that was dinner. And I was a senior officer. It was madness.
During the embargo, a soldier's pay was never above 3,000 dinars, or $3 to $4 a month. And he had to travel from one region to the next, eat, drink, sleep, and then return to the front. All these conditions made invasion easier, rather than motivate a soldier to defend his homeland.
I left the army in 2002. Since I was unqualified, I started working in the presidential palaces as part of a team installing the internal communications networks. I earned 2,500 dinars a day, just under $3, and I was paid weekly.
The average salary for members of the security services was never higher than $5 to $10 a month. Members of the security services and the army dressed like hobos. Those who gave in to stealing or corruption made out okay, but the rest lived in extreme poverty.
Initially, the 4th Division was a part of the force that was supposed to enter Iraq. It was a very powerful division. It was our most modern division at the time, and our most modern mechanized division. Vehicles were able to see through digitized computer screens where each other were.
In terms of modernizing its military equipment, Iraq was way behind. So, in case of an attack on Baghdad, we wouldn't have been able to get one plane off the ground.
The vehicle I commanded is an M1A1 main battle tank. It's a main battle tank. It's heavily armored and it's heavily armed. It's got a 120 millimeter cannon, which is a big cannon. It shoots with a muzzle velocity of a mile a second. The round coming out of the tube travels a mile a second, and there's no armor on the modern day battlefield that cannon cannot defeat. So if I can hit you, it's going to kill you.
Iraqi military equipment was a full generation behind that of the Americans. In the regiments I commanded, the most modern tanks dated from 1972. That's old enough, but we had other tanks that dated from 1955 and 1962.
There was constant training, constant activity. So much so that there was a haze over all of Kuwait that was made from all the tanks and the armored personnel carriers and boots on the ground. It just was like smog. It's just the entire sky was lit up with this bright haze.
Let's go.
It worked out very well for us because we had the entire desert to train and operate in. And so we did what all American units do. We do war games, what if kind of things, because we never knew if we did get the order to conduct the invasion, what would the objective be and how far would we go.
In Iraq, the Ba'ath Party had two branches, one civilian and one military. As Ba'ath was the only party in government, it also controlled the army. Any citizen who worked in public or military services had to be a Ba'ath Party member. For military men, it was strict. They had to be loyal and faithful to the Ba'ath Party.
الجهاز الحزبي متوزع ضمن المناطق ضمن الرقعة الجغرافية يعني
The party apparatus controlled the whole area. We controlled every district, main streets and back alleys.
كاملة
We had the full responsibility of a centralized body whose leaders in the field held all sorts of powers. That way, the moment someone came into one of our sectors, they were immediately checked and questioned.
On every street corner and intersection, there was a party office on one side, a security service office on the other. And nearby, there was always a Secret Service office. All three of them were watching each other.
Any party bigwig could claim to have recruited 1,000 activists when he'd really only recruited a handful or none. The aim was to look good in the eyes of the leaders, but this illusion of a massive number of party members weakened the regime in the end.
They didn't stop coming to see us. We asked them what they wanted, and they said they wanted women as well as men to become Ba'ath Party members. May Allah damn them. They wanted us to turn into their supporters so we would spy on our own friends and families.
In Iraq, social relations had broken down. Sons denounced fathers, daughters denounced mothers, and wives wrote reports denouncing their husbands. So social and family ties were completely undone, to such a point that a father could send his son off to war in the hope that he'd die a martyr, and the father would earn a bonus or be awarded damages.
We did get a lot of training about the Iraqi people, about the culture, and they told us they understand we're of a different religion, but if you're the sort of person who hides your religion, that makes you untrustable. So don't hide your religion.
We learned some language, some words. Thank you. Stop or I'll shoot.
We learned how to say Keith, which means stop, and Shukran, which means thank you. La Shukran means no thank you. Medina means city. Very few words.
If you're a combat unit and your mission is to kill and lay waste to everything in front of you. So what do you need to know about the local population? Not much. You just need to know that they're not dressed the same as you are, and you just need to know what kind of weapons they might have or what kind of problems you might run into.
One of the things I emphasize, and I'm a realist in this respect, you're not going to teach everybody how to speak Arabic, but if you pick up a few phrases, I mean, I know how to say thank you in 25 languages, and that word gets you the most mileage in just about any culture.
There was some cultural training, sensitivity training in the sense of trying to instill in the Marines that they were not there to be a conquering force. They tried to instill it very much in them that in fact what they were there to do was depose Saddam Hussein and get Saddam out of power and then leave.
Of course, the regime-controlled media only showed one side of things and never the other. Alternative media and television channels were banned. So by only ever seeing Saddam Hussein making his speeches, you ended up believing him. And before the war, this belief was at a maximum.
A
few months before the war, those close to the powers that be had a feeling of fear and uncertainty that we didn't pick up on. One day, as we were watching Saddam Hussein making a speech at the place of his nephew, Ayman Sabawi, Ayman suddenly started laughing. I asked him why he was laughing, especially because his uncle seemed really pessimistic. And he said, when my uncle smiles and smokes a cigar, it means he's sure he'll win. I told him there's no proof that a smile and a cigar could bring off such a miracle.
People were worn out. When rumors spread of the end of Saddam's regime, we were dumbfounded. But when he appeared on TV to make his speeches, we all thought he was nuts, that he'd lost his mind. He carried on as if he held the whole Arab world in his hand.
في هذا الاجتماع في 30/6/2002 طلبت الحديث
On June 30th, 2002, in a meeting with Saddam, I asked if we could talk about the possible forthcoming war with the U.S. I illustrated the gap between us, including the Republican Guard, our so-called crack troops, and the American and Allied forces.
None of us doubted we could defeat Saddam's army. Our army had defeated them once before in the first Gulf War. We knew that they were going to be beaten, and severely. The question became, what then?
وعليه كان المقترح اللي اقترحت على الرئيس صدام حسين إن لم تتمكن
As war seemed inevitable,
السياسية العليا العراقية من تفادي الحرب
I suggested to the president that we reorganize our army
العسكري بحيث نغير عقيدتنا إلى حرب العصابات أي
and the way we did battle in order to mount guerrilla warfare.
نوع من أنواع القتال وهو الحرب الغير نظامي أي حرب العصابات.
After the meeting, while we were posing for the official photo, the president gave a mocking smile and said, "Are you trying to scare us, General?"
تحاول أن تخيفنا يا جنرال.
وكل العراقيين حاضرين لملاقاة الأعداء. والله ينصرك سيدي ويحفظك.
ويحفظكم إن شاء الله ويحفظ الشعب.
نحن كنا جنود جندي يتلقى مع أوامر.
We were just simple soldiers,
من القيادات.
following our superiors' orders.
من خلال المعلومات اللي تجينا من خلال ضباط.
The officers told us we had the necessary strength and morale to resist.
عندنا القوة الكافية وعندنا الاستعداد النفسي
We were really motivated.
نقاوم هيك فكانت اكو حوافز.
We believed we could fight and win the war.
نقدر نقاوم ونقدر يعني احتمال
At that moment,
ننتصر بالحرب.
our whole future was at stake.
تهديد تقرير مصير.
احنا صرخة الحياة ما تهزنا العاصفات عدينا صدام
وموزعة الأدوار.
Roles were clearly handed out. Military leaders were dispatched to the different regions of Iraq. But these leaders refused to obey the orders of the political leaders. And contrary to what was said, the political leaders didn't make decisions for the military leaders.
In the context of preparing for war, the room for maneuver of the military command was considerably reduced due to the power of the politicians.
The opposite is true. The political leaders were spread over 3 regions: the south, center, and the north were placed under the leadership of military leaders because it was a military conflict.
All Iraqi army leaders knew that Saddam had formed 3 main regional military axes, one in the north, one in the center, and one in the south. To lead them, he appointed non-military men: Al-Hussein al-Majid, Qusay Saddam Hussein, and Izzat al-Duri.
Ali Hassan al-Majid, alias Chemical Ali, was the man who did Saddam's dirty work, the bloodthirsty liquidator, among other exploits, of the Kurds. Qusay Saddam Hussein was naturally primed to take over from his father. As for Izzat Ibrahim al-Duri, he had always been Saddam's right-hand man in politics. Later, the king of clubs would be one of the few to escape the clutches of the Americans and secretly carry on his political career among the ranks of the insurgents.
None of them had any link with the military or any idea of Iraqi's military history. It created an unspeakable mess and a general feeling of anxiety.
But how much longer before we, as a council, we, as the United Nations, say, enough, enough? Iraq declared 8,500 liters of anthrax.
I remember in Kuwait, we're in the big tent with my soldiers, and there's a TV there. And Colin Powell was giving his speech up at the UN. And I'm sitting there watching him intently. And just sort of out loud, I said, this guy doesn't believe what he's saying. And a couple of my officers turned to me and said, sir, what are you talking about?
You know, you're sitting out there, you have the, not just the 1st Marine Division out in the Kuwaiti desert, you have half of the U.S. Army, you have Air Force, Navy, everybody's out there, and you're thinking, sometimes it's just like that the avalanche that started, and it's like, how do you stop it? You kind of don't.
We opened up a Pandora's box out there, and we weren't really prepared to deal with the whole consequence of that.
Iraq was living in a bubble, totally cut off. Back then we had no cell phones or satellite TV. Iraqis could watch only state-run channels, the only ones allowed.
Same for the press. There were only 5 newspapers, and all of them told the same story. The only difference between them was the font they used for their headlines.
All news in Iraq was coated in lead. There were no satellite channels, but we listened to the French radio station RMC. All Iraqis listened to that or to the BBC World Service. They heard the voices of the opposition in exile and the appeals they launched. We knew the war was lost in advance. 100% lost.
The TV technicians refitted the basement studios, which had been deserted, and they started working in an experimental way. The anchormen came down and started broadcasting from there. We had a sense of urgency, but no one told us anything officially.
I believe the final count in Kuwait was, at the time the war kicked off, I want to say there were 750 journalists. That's a lot of reporters, photographers, producers of every type. That's a lot of people out on the battlefield. That's almost an entire battalion right there.
محافظة التأميم التقينا بشعبة الواسطي من أبناء حزبنا العقائدي حزب البعث العربي الاشتراكي. الله يساعدهم الشباب. أهلا وسهلا. شلون المعنويات؟
الحمد لله المعنويات عالية.
الناس الذين جاءوا من خارج العراق لتطوع.
We did reports on people who had come from Jordan, Syria, and Palestine. Lots of youngsters arrived to enlist in an organization called the Fedayeen of Saddam. They weren't called the Fedayeen of Iraq, but the Fedayeen of Saddam. They were trained by the Ba'ath Party bigwigs, trained to blow themselves up, to fight, and to handle weapons. These guys were dispatched throughout the country.
مهدات حشوة 2 الارتفاع 749.
We poked fun at ourselves. We knew there was a national defense plan, but in the case of an American chemical attack or aerial bombardments, our training would prove useless. Would we have time to take cover? We were in a ridiculous situation. but we had to obey. We were unusually worried. The officers knew we could be defeated in a single day.
All the efforts were focused on protecting Ba'ath Party and government buildings, and on nothing else. Normal citizens had to fend for themselves, to feed their families, and protect their friends and loved ones.
For us to stock up, especially as we Iraqis love to eat, the authorities handed out rations every 2 months. We were ready for anything, even a chemical attack. We sealed the windows with nylon, and we were ready. But we were scared. Scared of not knowing the outcome and of not knowing what lay in store.
Intercepted communications indicate one division southeast of Baghdad is about to be issued chemical weapons to be used against the invaders.
When we were still in Kuwait, like in the days leading up to the invasion, we were constantly told Saddam has chemical weapons, for sure, and he will use them. But it was all very scary stuff because, you know, they were giving us these syringes and telling us that we had to inject our thighs to counteract the gas or we would die.
At the time, I felt like a camera, moving from one place to another. I was observing what people were going through. There was kind of a never-ending wait. The regime was preparing for war, while the people were going about their daily business. They went to the pool, watched TV, read books. They saw themselves as extras in a drama. The drama had begun, but they weren't really part of it.
Saddam called a big meeting on the first day of 2003. His vision of things had become metaphysical and religious. He came out with something that made me shiver and chilled me to the bone. He said, I know the Iraqi army is weak, very weak compared to the American army. But Allah has no other army than ours. A holy miracle will happen. The Americans will reach the gates of Baghdad, and we will beat them. And when you return victorious from this battle, I will tell you, now go west. Free Jerusalem from the Israelis and put the Palestinians back on their land. To my mind, this was the closing speech of the Iraqi movie.
A week before the war, Saddam stopped appearing on TV to give his speeches. We'd receive a sound recording, which we listened to, transcribed and read out on air. The anchor had to read out about 60 or 70 pages during the broadcast. Sometimes we ran late, and the proofreader had to sit at the anchor's feet, handing him the pages, one by one. It made us suspicious. There were two possibilities. Either Saddam looked too weak to appear on screen, or he had left Baghdad.
From Saddam's perspective, he saw, threats, regular threats to him, and there were regular threats to him. He was quite correct. So he tended to withdraw. He tended to trust people even less. He tended to not trust those who came from outside of his family or tribe. He tended not to trust those whom he didn't control directly.
In Saddam Hussein's inner circle were his two sons. One of them, Uday, a rather disturbing figure, openly displayed his image as a lover of big cats. Everything was set up for him to show off his pathological power and ferocity. Uday was as unreliable as he was unpredictable. When war was announced, his father put him in charge of the militia, which suited his nature, the Fedayeen of Saddam. The other son, Qusay, had learned from his father that absolute power could only last if it was carried out in cold blood. Saddam Hussein had made him supreme head of his elite army, the Republican Guard, and of his secret service. He saw Qusay alone as his successor. In the war preparations, the heir of the Rais, despite his lack of military experience, became a main decision-maker.
The Minister of Defense was only there for show. He was nothing compared to Qusay. Qusay had the...
We had a very dangerous role as a kind of family screen around Hussein. It meant acting as his eyes and ears, and bringing him messages from the outside or concealing things from him. We either told him what he wanted to hear or hid what he didn't want to hear.
One of the key individuals for Saddam throughout the 1990s and up to the war was his presidential secretary, a guy by the name of Abed Hamoud.
Abed Hamoud ran all the security departments in Saddam's name, except for the Special Secret Service run by Qusay, at his father's request. Abed Hamoud shut off all communication routes to Saddam.
This was a guy who went in to see Saddam, he knew what Saddam decided, and he knew what came out of Saddam's office. He knew as much about Iraq and the regime as anyone other than Saddam. He knew more even than the sons.
Abed Hamoud was the only man allowed to carry a gun in Saddam's presence. Always at his side, he was everywhere, filtering everything, keeping an eye on everything. Later, when the American offensive started, he would prove particularly useful and loyal by stashing Saddam's money and weapons. A few weeks before the outbreak of war, he met with several leaders of the Republican Guard who wanted to inform Saddam of the true state of the army. Abed Hamoud told them this: "If I give you the privilege of addressing Saddam, you will have two obligations: to be resolutely optimistic and to satisfy him with what you say." Saddam saw the officers and spoke with them. They said nothing and applauded him at the end.
We managed to catch Bush's speech with our satellite dishes. That was the only way we could hear it.
Saddam Hussein and his sons must leave Iraq within 48 hours.
That's when we knew something serious was about to happen.
In fact, our vision of Iraq and its army was wrong. We had no real idea of how bad the shortages were due to the embargo. Iraq had been bled dry. It was an empty shell. One blow from the outside and it would collapse. We had never imagined that.
They took up position in every street in the capital, which became one big army base. The Ba'ath Party dug trenches and set up walls of sandbags in the streets. They were trying to fool everyone into thinking the regime could hold out, that they were in control of the situation and that the Americans would enter neither Iraq nor Baghdad. There were also smoke clouds, which, according to Saddam, would prevent the Americans from targeting the regime's positions. A few days before the fighting started, the U.S. Air Force dropped pamphlets calling for the Iraqi people to rise up against Saddam. A lot of regions were showered with pamphlets, a tactic that escaped the control of Saddam's security forces.
In Amara, we received pamphlets urging us to desert or face destruction. They said that we were defending injustice and that they were defending justice.
We only really understood when Ba'ath Party members started going door to door, district by district, handing out weapons.
We couldn't advance, we couldn't retreat. We were mere pawns.
The Minister of Defense lost control of the troops. Army headquarters had no further role in running operations.
It was late winter. We couldn't watch weather forecasts on TV. It was the time of the Taraya, the time of sandstorms. The mood was one of great sadness. At that point, I realized it was the moment of truth, the final battle. Baghdad was deserted. The only sound was silence. We had the feeling the whole city belonged to us. But while we were acutely aware of what the city meant to us, we knew this feeling would disappear. Everything was cloaked in silence. One of my friends said, "The city has gone mute," and another one answered him, "If the city has stopped talking, it means it's dead." this city is already dead.
On March 19, 2003, at dawn, we were informed that the air traffic control radars had picked up more than 20 planes in Iraqi airspace to the south. These planes had flown within 180 kilometers of Baghdad before turning round and heading back south. But on the second day, the so-called shock and awe offensive truly began, and Baghdad was bombed with incredible intensity.
The explosion started before dawn. They were really loud. But I wasn't scared. I watched the show with the planes and the anti-aircraft fire through the window. It was like a big firework display. But the detonations were terrifying.
The air bombardment started with cruise missiles. Then the US Air Force filled the Iraqi skies. I was at home. When I heard the attack, I quickly put on my army uniform. The Minister of Defense had relocated 6 HQs around Baghdad.
People started packing up their belongings. I saw them in my neighborhood carrying blankets, furniture, supplies, flour. They were loading up their cars and waiting for daybreak before leaving. It was a dramatic image that reminded me of piling up corpses to take them to a mass grave. At that moment, it was as if Baghdad had disappeared.
I arrived at the assembly point. The minister was already there, along with all his officers.
With their experience of the 1990 Gulf War, American planes knew how to target our anti-aircraft defenses. The fact that these had been positioned in residential areas gave citizens all the more reason to flee the city.
My neighborhood was bombed. I remember telling my family I wouldn't leave the house because I wanted to watch what was happening. As they left, my family was furious because they thought the war would destroy everything, the buildings and their inhabitants.
From the Kuwaiti border, 500 armored vehicles and 170,000 troops would now be unleashed on Iraq. Among them, the 3rd Battalion of the 4th Marines Regiment, led by Colonel Brian McCoy, a war leader looked up to by his men. McCoy was a Cuban cigar lover with a bizarre ritual. Before every battle, he would whistle the well-known Brazilian tune, The Girl from Ipanema. The radio code name he chose for himself was Dark Side, a nod to the Star Wars movies. That morning, McCoy, whose mission was to advance on the capital, was still unaware that due to a statue on Paradise Square, he would become the man who conquered Baghdad.
We're seeing some rocket flashes from the left here. That's what, west. This camera is facing north. We're not really sure what it is. We might have thought it was gas. We donned our masks, and then we were told to cease and desist. Everything was all clear. I'm speaking during this video for documentation purposes.
It was very dark. It was very scary up there because it was just sand, and you kind of didn't even know where the border was. We kept moving around and changing position, waiting for the final announcement that the invasion was launched. And what I did to start with was I was in the Humvee with Colonel McCoy at the beginning of all this, at the time hoping that I would be able to see enough combat that was going on, but he was a well-protected guy, so saved my life.
I think one of the sort of defining thoughts as we went across the Burma into Iraq with myself and most soldiers, and that was sort of all of the unknowns.
I was following, with military high command and the secret services, the battle that had started in the south. There were undeniable signs of a mass offensive. Among them, openings made in the wall of sand separating Kuwait and Iraq.
We crossed at a place called Safwan. The two governments here dug a big ditch and put a big berm up to distinguish where the international border lies. We're up front, so we're going to be one of the first ones going, but you're waiting for your turn. So you wait, you wait, you wait. But when your time comes, you charge through there because it's a choke point. You got to get through there very fast. Keep it clear so that units can just keep pushing as rapidly as we can, and we're not bottled up there, which would be a good place for the enemy to attack.
Finally made it, man. Where are we? Just crossed the border to Iraq about 10 miles ago. Destination, north.
At around 4 p.m., the first clashes started in Naziriyah and in Basra, where there was a regiment to protect the oil fields, as there was in Qasr.
We have a lot of units coming their way, and the first one I engaged, it was a T-54 tank, and exploded. It was not very dramatic or anything like that. It just was pretty much the way we had been trained to do it. Acquired him, engaged him, shot him, killed him.
I was at home when the war started. We joined up with our army units following the Rais's speech. We had already dug personal trenches. We handed out wages, equipment, and munitions in the trenches. The tanks took up position, but that night was hell for us.
When the war started, I was on the Saudi border. in the al-Hashu region. We were attacked during the night by helicopters. We were in a state of total confusion. It was the first war we'd ever been in. We'd only just joined the army after graduating from college. We were a forward observation unit. There were 3 of us, 2 officers and 1 soldier. All we had was 1 Kalashnikov each. I was in charge of 2 Strela missiles, but I couldn't even get out and launch them due to the bad situation we were in.
On the first day, the U.S. Air Force was cautious. But this caution gradually disappeared, and planes started swooping down above our trenches. They were having fun. They're terrible memories, absolutely terrifying. Every night lasted an eternity. The bombings were non-stop. At sunup, you discover a tank blown up here, a dead body there, the quartermaster burned to cinders. One night, the Americans bombed the supplies store not far from my position. I woke up and all I could see were flames. In the morning, I saw that the gasoline stocks and tankers had all burned. My face was black and deformed from the soot that had spread everywhere during the night.
When I entered Iraq, it was like what you can imagine of what you see on television about Iraq. The flat desert, the white sands, the tents, the Bedouins, and the areas associated with that. But as we got closer to Baghdad, it sort of became not necessarily a paradise, but there was a lot of trees and a lot of vegetation.
We were in our attack formations going across this sparsely populated area in western Iraq, and you would come upon these Bedouin tribes that by nature they move around the desert with their animals from grazing area to grazing area. And so you literally had almost 2 eras of times in history come in contact with each other. Bedouins kind of look up and just wondering, like, who are these people on these tanks? And ours are sort of driving by. They seem to be very friendly people. They're waving and exchanging pleasantries and all that. So it was kind of a surreal moment. You can imagine, you have an alien in your local community. I mean, we don't want to be there, consistently throughout the years. We want to be able to transition into a stable government and to help the Iraqi people. And I think that's what they were looking for.
There did start to be the use of the term Haji. Haji is an Arab term that refers to somebody who has gone on the Hajj to Mecca, which you're supposed to do at some time in your life if you're Muslim. But nobody wanted to make it like ugly or pejorative. Once you're in a combat zone and there's fighting and you watch your friend die at the hands of somebody who looks like that or who acts like that, speaks like that, then Haji becomes like, then it's no longer, hey, that Haji was here. Now it's like, well, fucking Haji.
I tried to think rationally, but I could see in this war some mysterious dimension. Due to the all-technological power that could reduce everything to a mirage. I kept questioning myself. Ethically, can I be for a war that will result in regime change? Or should I be against it because I'm a writer and I don't believe in resorting to violence?
At daybreak, I was supposed to go to work. My father wanted to leave the house and go somewhere safer, outside the capital. He thought the war was only to get Saddam Hussein. But to reach him, Baghdad would have to burn like in previous wars. My mother had a more religious view. If it's written that we shall die, then we shall die. If it's written that we shall live, then we shall live. I felt uneasy about both my father's view and my mother's view. Baghdad wasn't its bridges and buildings, it was us, our neighbours and our friends. I insisted on going to work, but my mother and father refused. Despite that, a car came for me at 10 o'clock and I left. I cried. I was so sad. I crossed the Bridge of the Republic and I saw government headquarters and the ministries in flames. The radio was broadcasting a speech by Saddam in a form of poetry. Stay and resist. The war has begun.
ولكنني أقول على كل واحد منا في عائلة العراق المؤمنة الصابرة المظلومة من أعدائها الأشرار أن يتذكر. Oh, this ain't gonna work. Bumpy roads. Either we're almost there or we're not even close.
It was mostly desert as we were out to the west of the main highway, avoiding the cities. Of course, 3rd Infantry Division on the west side of the Euphrates River, and the Marines were on the east side of the river, had already moved up.
We killed a lot of Iraqis on the first day, and it's very easy for us to defeat them. And we pulled into our position that first night, and I spoke to my gunner, a Marine named Corporal Schroeder. And I said, almost doesn't even seem fair, does it? He said, no, Staff Sergeant, I said, well, you just keep pulling the trigger. You don't worry about that. You'll figure out how to live with it later, but you just keep pulling that trigger.
McCoy just said this to the Marines. He said, keep your honor clean. Remember that. You don't want to get back to the United States. You don't want to get done with this and feel like you've sullied yourself or dirtied yourself. Like, don't do the wrong. Do the right thing. Always do the right thing. Keep your honor clean. Fight with a happy heart. And let's go do our nation's business.
كانت الدبابات أمام أعيننا في أول يوم. Right on day one, our tanks were destroyed by American planes, like at a turkey shoot. The battle was lost in advance. We just wondered when it would be over, where it would happen, what limits they would set themselves, what the fate of the Iraqi people would be, and what would happen to our mothers and children. Those were the things we were worried about.
A few tanks made it to Dibiasat, but once there, they were bombed. From then on, our unit broke up. The senior officer fled, along with all the other officers. It felt like a tree had come down on me.
We clearly weren't looking for major battles. We were looking for possibilities of launching small attacks on them.
Over this rise came a number of pickup trucks. I said really kind of civilian pickup trucks, but they had machine guns mounted on the back. And then they had fighters in the back with RPG, rocket launchers, and things like that. And they started engaging our tanks. It was clear that these white pickup trucks were not friendly vehicles, and in fact, were what were going to become one of the major enemy elements.
When I used to write poems questioning the regime, I would disguise it to protect myself in case it fell into the authorities' hands. Then, for the very first time, I felt the regime had reached its end. For the very first time, I could write freely with my hand and reread with the expectant eyes of someone awaiting that end.
Most of those close to Saddam left to take refuge in places far away from where they had been posted. Many of the bigwigs in the regime left their governorates to go back to their hometowns.
Basically, the highest placed Ba'ath Party members fled the battleground and sought refuge outside Iraq. They hadn't planned anything for after the war.
بذات الوقت يوم 21 دفع رتل من اتجاه طريق الناصري. هذا الآن الرتل اندفع وفرز انقسم قسمين. قسم توجه باتجاه سوق الشيوخ وأيضا اصطدم بالقطاعات الموجودة عندنا هناك. واصطدم بالعشائر والحزب وتوقف. يصير عليه لواء معاد البكائي.
During the first days of the war, there was a famous press conference given by the Minister of Defense, Sultan Hashem, the only professional soldier on the defense team. The army chief, Sultan Hashem, had predicted that the Americans would be inside Baghdad within 2 weeks, which is what happened just after this press conference. It was practically an order for the army to lay down its weapons, because if the defense minister was so sure of the outcome, what was the point in fighting?
We took advantage of a unique opportunity when an endless 3-day sandstorm blew up during the night of March 25th to 26th.
Just kept building stronger, and we were all afraid because it was like, well, okay, we're just gonna sit here and wait this sandstorm out, but like, what if the Iraqis are gonna use this? This is their territory. They could just come and attack us.